You wake up exhausted, and the first thing you do is reach for your phone. Before your eyes adjust to the light, before your lungs take their first conscious breath, you are already performing. Checking messages, scrolling feeds, broadcasting your availability to a system that never sleeps because it has trained you never to rest. This is not an accident. This exhaustion you carry in your bones, this transparency you perform with every click and share, this is not a bug in the system. It is the system. Byung-Chul Han, the South Korean philosopher who refuses to own a smartphone and cultivates what he calls a secret garden, identified something most of us feel but cannot name. We live in what he terms the burnout society, a world where the old disciplinary mechanisms of control have been replaced by something far more insidious: achievement. You are not being oppressed by an external force, you are the master and the slave in one. The violence is no longer negative, coming from outside in the form of prohibitions and restrictions. The violence is positive, manifesting as overachievement, overproduction, overcommunication, hyperattention, and hyperactivity. And writes that today, everyone is an auto-exploiting laborer in his or her own enterprise. You do not need a boss standing over you with a whip. You have internalized the whip. You crack it against your own back every morning when you wake up tired and tell yourself you are not doing enough. The achievement subject does not believe it is subjugated. It believes it is free. Always refashioning and reinventing ourselves, we think we are projects of liberation, when in fact we are participating in a more efficient kind of subjectivation and subjugation. This is why you are tired. Not because you worked too hard yesterday, but because the structure of your existence has been reconfigured to extract value from your very exhaustion. Depression, attention deficit disorder, borderline personality disorder, burnout. Han argues these are not infections but infarcts. They are not caused by the negativity of external oppression, but by an excess of positivity. You are drowning not in prohibition but in possibility, not in limitation but in the demand to optimize every moment of your existence, and you must do this transparently. Han's second diagnosis, the Transparency Society, reveals how neoliberal market forces have created a cultural norm of total disclosure. Transparency, that word we were taught to associate with honesty and democracy, has become a totalitarian system of openness that operates at the expense of shame, secrecy, and trust. Every thought must be shared. Every experience must be documented. Every emotion must be performed for an audience that is simultaneously surveilling you and demanding you surveil yourself. You are not just tired, you are legible. You are data. You are a text that the system can read, parse, predict, and ultimately control. The demand for transparency is the demand that you make yourself available for exploitation at every level of your being. Your sleep patterns, your walking routes, your purchasing decisions, your political leanings, your sexual desires, all of it must be converted into information that can be harvested, analyzed, and monetized. Here is where the trap closes. The burnout society makes you too tired to resist. The Transparency Society makes resistance impossible because it has already seen you coming. When you are exhausted and legible, you are perfectly controlled. You do not need prison walls when the prisoner has been convinced that the cell is freedom and that the chains are the tools of self-actualization. But there is a way out. Not an escape in the traditional sense because there is nowhere to escape to, the system is total. But there is a method, one that the system cannot process, cannot predict, cannot commodify. It is the method of becoming indecipherable, and it begins with a 20th century philosopher standing in the rubble of occupied France, asking the only question that matters. Albert Camus, in 1942, while millions of refugees fled advancing German armies, while the world burned and reason failed, wrote that there is only one really serious philosophical question, and that is suicide. He was not being dramatic. He was being precise. If life is absurd, if there is no ultimate meaning, if the universe maintains an unreasonable silence in response to our desperate need for purpose, then why continue? Why wake up tomorrow? Why push the boulder up the mountain when you know it will roll back down? Why participate in the exhaustion and transparency that Han describes when it leads nowhere except to more exhaustion and more transparency? Camus' answer was not hope. Hope is a lie the system sells you to keep you compliant? His answer was revolt, not revolution, which seeks to replace one system with another, but revolt, which is the constant confrontation with absurdity without ever accepting it as final. The absurd, Camus argued, arises when the human need to understand meets the unreasonableness of the world, when the appetite for the absolute meets the impossibility of reducing this world to a rational principle. This is the forbidden method. To become indecipherable, you must first embrace that you live in an absurd universe. The system wants you to believe that if you just work harder, optimize better, share more transparently, you will find meaning, success, happiness. This is the lie that keeps you enslaved. Camus tells you the truth. There is no meaning waiting at the end of your productivity. There is no ultimate justification for your suffering. The boulder will always roll back down the mountain. But here is where the power enters. When you stop hoping for the boulder to stay at the top, when you accept the absurdity of the task, you are suddenly free. Without hope for a better future or eternity, without a need to pursue life's purpose or to create meaning, you enjoy a freedom with regard to common rules. The system can no longer manipulate you with promises of eventual reward. The Transparency Society can no longer extract your data because you have stopped performing for an audience that you now understand does not matter. Camus wrote that what counts is not the best living, but the most living. In a world without meaning, there is no scale of values imposed from above. You are free to construct your own values, not based on what the system rewards, but based on what intensifies your existence. This is revolt. This is freedom. This is passion. The three consequences Camus identifies from fully acknowledging the absurd. Revolt means you stop participating in the narratives of progress and optimization that the burnout society depends on. You recognize that the demand to constantly improve yourself is not coming from your authentic desires, but from a system that profits from your anxiety. When you revolt, you say no. Not to life, but to the colonization of your life by achievement culture. You work when you choose to work. You rest without justification. You refuse to document your existence for algorithmic consumption. Freedom, in the absurd sense, means you are no longer bound by the hope that transparency will lead to connection, that productivity will lead to fulfillment, that optimization will lead to happiness. These are false gods, and Camus teaches us that the moment you stop believing in them, they lose all power over you. You become unreadable to the systems of control because you are no longer playing by their rules. Passion means you pour your energy not into what the system values, but into what makes you feel most alive. Camus' examples are instructive. Don Juan, who lives the passionate life to the fullest without concern for eternal love. The actor, who demonstrates that appearing creates being, living ephemeral lives for ephemeral fame. The conqueror, who engages fully in human history while knowing nothing can last and no victory is final. These are not role models in the conventional sense. They are patterns of existence that refuse the logic of accumulation and permanence that neoliberal capitalism depends on. This is the ghost phase protocol, and it begins with a simple recognition. You are already dead. Not literally, but existentially. The life you are living, the one where you wake up exhausted and immediately check your phone, where you perform productivity and broadcast transparency, that is not a life. It is a simulation of life designed to extract value from your biological processes. The ghost phase means you stop animating this simulation. You withdraw your living energy from the systems that feed on it. Step 1 is sleep. Real sleep, not the fragmented half-consciousness interrupted by notifications and anxiety about tomorrow's tasks. Han notes that the violence of positivity manifests as hyperactivity and hyperattention. Your exhaustion is a weapon being used against you. When you are tired, you cannot think clearly. You cannot resist effectively. You accept conditions you would reject if you had the energy to imagine alternatives. So you sleep. Not as self-care, that insipid term the system uses to commodify rest, but as rebellion. You sleep as an act of refusal. You sleep to restore the cognitive capacity necessary to see through the lies. Step 2 is opacity. The Transparency Society demands you make yourself legible. Becoming indecipherable means you start lying, not maliciously but strategically. You give the algorithms false information. You create multiple personas. You refuse to consolidate your identity into a single, coherent narrative that can be packaged and sold. Han writes that the dictates of transparency enforce a totalitarian system of openness. Your opacity is a direct assault on this system. When they cannot read you, they cannot control you. This is not about going off-grid, that tired libertarian fantasy that changes nothing about the underlying structure. You remain in the world. You use the tools, but you use them against their intended purpose. You post content designed to confuse the recommendation algorithms. You engage in behaviors that corrupt your data profile. You become noise in the system instead of signal. Step 3 is to murder your future self. The achievement subject lives in a permanent state of deferred gratification. You are always working toward a future version of yourself who will be more successful, more optimized, more complete. This future self is a ghost that haunts your present, making every moment inadequate, turning rest into waste and pleasure into guilt. Han explains that as a project deeming itself free of external limitations, the I subjugates itself to internal limitations and self-constraints, which take the form of compulsive achievement and optimization. Kill this future ghost. Camus teaches that without meaning in life, there is no scale of values. The version of yourself that you are supposed to become, richer, more disciplined, more accomplished, is a fiction created by the system to keep you in a state of permanent inadequacy. When you murder this ghost, when you accept that there is no final form you are supposed to achieve, you can finally inhabit the present moment without apology. Step 4 is to cultivate what Han calls the other. In Agony of Eros, he argues that contemporary society is increasingly dominated by narcissism and self-reference. The loss of desire, the disappearance of the ability to devote to the other, the stranger, the non-self, has created a world where subjects revolve exclusively around themselves, unable to build real relationships. Even love and sexuality have been colonized by exhibition, voyeurism, and representation. The other is what cannot be reduced to data. The other is what resists transparency. The other is the encounter that cannot be predicted or controlled. To become indecipherable, you must seek out these encounters, not through the mediated interfaces of social media, where all otherness is filtered through algorithms designed to show you more of what you already like, but through direct, analog, unpredictable contact. This is where Eros lives, in the friction between self and other, in the space that opens up when you confront something that refuses to conform to your expectations. Han notes that thinking is based on the untreaded, on the desire for something that one does not yet understand. It is connected to Eros, so the agony of Eros is also an agony of thought. When you lose the ability to desire the other, you lose the ability to think critically. The system wants you narcissistic because narcissists are easy to control. They see the world only as a reflection of themselves, which means they cannot imagine alternatives to the present arrangement. Cultivating the other, seeking out genuine difference, is an act of cognitive rebellion. Step 5 is to embrace uselessness. Camus presents Sisyphus, condemned to push a boulder up a mountain for eternity, as the absurd hero. The workman of today works every day in his life at the same tasks, and this fate is no less absurd, Camus writes. But it is tragic only at the rare moments when it becomes conscious. The system depends on you not becoming conscious of the meaninglessness of your labor. It needs you to believe that your productivity serves a higher purpose. When you embrace uselessness, when you engage in activities that generate no value for the system, you reclaim your existence from the logic of capital. Han refuses to own a smartphone and only listens to music in analog form. These are not nostalgic affectations. They are deliberate choices to remove himself from networks of surveillance and commodification. You do not need to replicate his specific practices, but you need to find your own. Activities that produce nothing, that cannot be optimized, that exist solely for their own sake. This is where Camus' passion reappears. Passion is not the same as productivity. Passion is the intensity of engagement that comes from doing something because it makes you feel alive, not because it advances your position in some imaginary hierarchy. The system has taught you to feel guilty about passion that does not produce results. This guilt is a control mechanism. When you engage in passionate uselessness, you are exercising the only freedom that matters, the freedom to waste your time on your own terms. Step 6 is the practice of scorn. Camus writes that there is no fate that cannot be surmounted by scorn. When Sisyphus acknowledges the futility of his task and the certainty of his fate, he is freed to realize the absurdity of his situation and to reach a state of contented acceptance. Scorn does not mean bitterness. It means a clear-eyed recognition of exactly how ridiculous the demands placed on you actually are. You are supposed to curate your life into content. You are supposed to monetize your hobbies. You are supposed to network constantly, building social capital that can be converted into economic capital. You are supposed to track your sleep, your steps, your heart rate, your moods, turning your biological existence into a data stream that can be analyzed for insights into how to extract even more value from your depleting reserves. When you understand how absurd these demands are, when you really see them clearly, they lose their power to shame you. Scorn is the weapon of the weak against the strong. You cannot overthrow the system. It is too large, too integrated into every aspect of existence. But you can scorn it. You can laugh at its pretensions. You can mock its promises. You can refuse to take seriously the metrics it uses to measure human worth. This is not cynicism, which is just exhausted hope. This is clear vision, seeing things as they actually are without the comforting delusions the system provides. Step 7 is to find your boulder. Camus is interested in Sisyphus during the walk down the mountain, after the stone has fallen, when the hero becomes conscious of his wretched condition. This is the truly tragic moment, but it is also the moment of freedom. Sisyphus does not have hope, but he continues pushing. Why? Because the struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. Your boulder is the thing you choose to push, not because it will get you anywhere, but because the act of pushing it is how you want to spend your existence, not your job, unless you are extraordinarily lucky, not your performance of productivity for the algorithm's approval. Your boulder is the practice, the discipline, the craft that you return to day after day, knowing it will never be finished, never be perfect, never justify itself according to external standards. For Han, it is his secret garden, years of cultivation, an experience that exists entirely outside the digital, the transparent, the commodified. For Camus, it was writing, creating absurd art that restricted itself to description of myriad experiences without judging and without alluding to even the slightest shadow of hope. For you, it will be something else, but you must find it. Because without your boulder, you are just exhausted and transparent. With it, you become indecipherable, a person engaged in a project the system cannot understand because it produces nothing the system values. This is not a solution. Camus rejected solutions. The absurd cannot be permanently accepted. It requires constant confrontation, constant revolt. There is no final state of liberation where you are free from the burnout society and the transparency society. These are the conditions of contemporary existence, but you can change your relationship to these conditions. You can stop hoping they will improve. You can stop performing for their approval. You can withdraw your existential investment from their promises of meaning. What remains is life, stripped of its comforting illusions, but also freed from its exhausting demands. You wake up, and you are still tired because your body exists in a world designed to tire it. But you do not reach for your phone. You take a breath. You feel the weight of your boulder, whatever it is, calling to you, not because you have to push it, because you choose to. Because in the choosing, in the conscious acceptance of absurdity, in the revolt against systems that demand your legibility and feast on your exhaustion, you have become something they cannot process. You have become indecipherable. Not because you have hidden yourself away, but because you have stopped participating in the logics that made you readable in the first place. The algorithm analyzes your behavior and finds contradictions. The achievement culture measures your output and finds insufficiency, but you no longer care because you have rejected the metrics. The transparency society demands your disclosure, and you give it noise, static, Performances that reveal nothing because there is no authentic core self to reveal. Only the continuous revolt against any attempt to fix your identity into a stable, exploitable form. This is the forbidden method because it cannot be taught systematically. It cannot be turned into a productivity hack or a self-improvement program. The moment it becomes a technique for achieving better outcomes, it has been reabsorbed by the achievement society it was meant to escape. It only works as long as it remains absurd, as long as it refuses to justify itself according to any external measure of value. You will not be rewarded for this. There is no crowd waiting to celebrate your liberation. Camus and Han offer no happy endings, no promises that embracing absurdity will make you successful or fulfilled according to conventional definitions. What they offer is the possibility of living consciously in an absurd world, of meeting exhaustion and transparency with revolt and opacity, of finding in the meaningless struggle itself enough to fill a heart. Society wants you tired because tired people do not rebel. Society wants you transparent because transparent people can be controlled. The path to power is not to overcome your tiredness through better sleep hygiene, or to protect your privacy through better encryption. These are band-aids on a structural wound. The path to power is to accept that you will be tired, that you will be surveilled, and to choose revolt anyway. To push your boulder not despite its meaninglessness but because of it. To scorn the systems that feed on you even as you continue to exist within them, corrupting them from the inside through your refusal to be the subject they demand you become. One must imagine you indecipherable. One must imagine you free,